The crystal-clear water turned crimson as Karen surfaced, gasping, her manicured nails clawing at the pool's edge. Behind her, the massive gray shadow moved closer, trunk swaying like a death pendulum. Her complaints, her lawsuits, her endless demands for managers. But Karma? Karma had 4 legs, weighed 6 tons, and was about to teach her the most expensive lesson of her life. The question wasn't whether she'd survive it, was whether anyone would believe what really happened when the gates of millionaires Row were left wide open. The security cameras at Belmont Estates captured everything, though the footage would later be sealed by court order and classified as too disturbing for public consumption. But at 2:47 p.m. on that sweltering Tuesday afternoon, Karen Whitfield was living her best life, completely unaware that her reign of terror was about to meet its match. Of her $8 million estate, its pristine surface reflecting the cloudless Arizona sky, Karen floated on her custom-made Italian pool lounger, diamond-encrusted sunglasses perched on her surgically perfected nose, a glass of Dom Perignon sweating in the cup holder beside her. Had won at life? Miguel shrieked, without moving her lips, a skill she'd perfected through years of Botox treatments. The water temperature is 79 degrees. I specifically told you 78. The pool maintenance man, a gentle soul named Miguel Rodriguez who supported 3 children and his elderly mother on his modest salary, appeared at the pool's edge with the resigned expression of a man who had learned to swallow his dignity in measured doses. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitfield. The heater's been acting up since yesterday. I called the repair company, but nothing." Karen's voice could have shattered the champagne flutes arranged on the nearby teak table. "Do you see this?" she gestured. Dramatically, at her Ronan's, this is a lifestyle that requires precision. When I pay $3,500 a month for pool maintenance, I expect perfection. Miguel's calloused hands tightened around his testing kit. $3,500 was more than he made in 2 months, but he said nothing. He had mouths to feed. "I want you to drain it. All of it, and refill it. Today, it'll take, I don't care if it takes until Christmas. Fix it." As Miguel retreated to gather his equipment, Karen's phone buzzed with a notification that brought a predatory smile to her collagen-enhanced lips. Another 1-star review had gone live on Yelp, this time for Romano's, the small Italian restaurant downtown where she demanded a free meal after complaining that her pasta was insufficiently al dente. Big mistake. Karen's fingers flew across her phone screen, crafting her masterpiece of destruction. She had 47,000 followers across her social media platforms, all hungry for her daily dose of righteous indignation. Her Karen's Crusades blog had become a digital weapon of mass destruction, capable of bankrupting small businesses with a single viral post. "Day 847 of holding service workers accountable," she typed. "Romano's thinks they can serve subpar food and treat customers like garbage. Time to show them what happens when you mess with the wrong person." Full review on my blog. Link in bio. #customer service, #quality matters, #KARENS. Crusades within minutes, the comments began flooding in. Her army of enablers and fellow complainers descended like digital locusts, promising 1-star reviews, health department calls, and boycotts. Karen's dopamine receptors fired like slot machine jackpots. This was her drug, her addiction, her purpose. She scrolled through her phone, surveying her recent conquests. 3 small businesses had closed in the past 6 months after falling victim to her campaigns. The flower shop that had refused to honor an expired coupon, the dry cleaner who couldn't remove a stain from her blouse fast enough, the coffee shop that had run out of her preferred oat milk. Each victory had made her hungrier for the next. The caller ID showed Belmont Estates, security. "What?" she answered, not bothering with pleasantries. "Mrs. Whitfield, this is Dave at the front gate. There's been some kind of incident, and the authorities are asking all residents to remain indoors until further notice." Karen sat up on her lounger, her interest piqued. Drama that didn't involve her directly was almost as entertaining as drama she created herself. "What kind of incident?" "Large animal control is involved." "Large animal control?" Karen's voice dripped with skepticism. $1,000 a month in HOA fees for premium security. If there's a rabid dog loose in the neighborhood, I expect to be properly informed. "It's not a dog, ma'am." "Then what is it?" Burst into laughter, the sound echoing across her empty estate like breaking glass. An elephant? Are you kidding me? What is this? A circus? The Riverside Preserve houses several rescued elephants, ma'am. There was an incident with their fencing this morning. I'm not hiding in my house because of your incompetence. If there's a dangerous animal loose, it should have been contained hours ago. I want to speak to your supervisor. Ma'am, I really think Karen hung up and tossed her phone onto the lounger. Typical. Even the security guards at Belmont Estates were becoming soft, making excuses instead of doing their jobs. She'd dealt with worse than a confused elephant. Last month, she'd faced down an entire city council meeting over a stop sign placement that blocked her view of the golf course. Silk. This was her castle, her fortress, her testament to a life lived without compromise. Here, surrounded by marble statuary and imported Italian tile, she was untouchable. The property stretched for 3 acres, bordered by 12-foot privacy walls topped with decorative ironwork. Of the perimeter, the main gate required a key card and biometric scan to open. Her home security system could detect a falling leaf at 50 yards. Nothing got in without her permission. Karen closed her eyes and let herself float the afternoon. Sun warming her skin. Tomorrow, she'd start working on Romano's competitors, building relationships that would help her spread the word about their disgusting food and terrible service. By next week, the restaurant would be hemorrhaging customers. By next month, they'd be begging her for mercy. This was how the world worked. The strong survived, the weak perished, and Karen Whitfield was the apex predator of customer complaints. The first sign of trouble was so subtle she almost missed it. A distant rumbling, like thunder from a cloudless sky. The water in her champagne. Glass rippled slightly, concentric circles spreading outward like tiny shock waves. Karen opened one eye, annoyed by the disturbance. Probably construction work at one of the neighboring estates. These nouveau rich tech millionaires were always renovating something, trying to prove they belonged in her stratosphere. The rumbling grew stronger. Now both eyes were open, her perfectly maintained composure beginning to crack. The water in the pool was actually moving, tiny waves lapping against the infinity edge. Whatever was causing this was big, and it was getting closer. Karen paddled to the shallow end and stood, water cascading from her designer swimsuit, become a rhythmic thudding, like massive footsteps on concrete. But that was impossible. The gates were locked, the walls were impenetrable. Nothing could the 12-foot privacy wall exploded inward like it was made of cardboard. Through the gap stepped something that shouldn't exist in Karen's perfectly ordered world. 6 tons of gray muscle and ancient wisdom, trunk swaying. With casual menace, ears spread wide like battle flags. The African elephant surveyed Karen's domain with intelligent eyes that had seen more of life than her social media followers could ever imagine. Karen Whitfield was speechless. The elephant's gaze found her standing in the shallow end of the pool, and something passed between them. Recognition, challenge, a reckoning decades in the making. Karen tried to scream, but no sound came. Her phone was 20 feet away on the lounger, useless as her frozen vocal cords. The security cameras were recording everything, but the guards thought she was safely inside. The elephant took another step forward, its massive foot crushing a marble cherub statue into powder. Then it spoke, not in words, but in the universal language of consequence. Its trunk rose like a question mark, and Karen realized with crystal clarity that her entire life had been building to this moment. She had spent years demanding managers, destroying livelihoods, terrorizing service workers who couldn't fight back. Today, she was about to meet a manager who didn't care about Yelp. Reviews? The elephant's name was Kessie, though Karen would never learn this. In Swahili, it meant born during troubled times, a prophecy that had followed the magnificent creature from the drought-ravaged plains of Kenya to the climate-controlled sanctuary of the Riverside Wildlife Preserve. For 23 years, Kessie had endured the casual cruelty of humans who saw her as entertainment, profit, or inconvenience. Today, she had finally had enough. The morning had started with Dr. Sarah Chen's routine inspection of the preserve's perimeter fencing. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Someone had been cutting the reinforced steel cables that secured the elephant enclosure, filing them down to hair-thin strands that looked intact but would snap under pressure. "This is deliberate," she'd told the police, her voice shaking with rage. Someone wanted the elephants to escape. The investigation would later reveal that Karen Whitfield had filed 17 complaints with the city council about the preserve, claiming the elephants were a public nuisance that decreased her property values. When those complaints failed, she'd escalated to lawsuits. When the lawsuits were dismissed, she'd taken matters into her own hands. She'd hired a contractor to weaken the fencing, planning to create an incident that would force the preserve to relocate. In her twisted logic, a few frightened elephants wandering into traffic would generate enough negative publicity to shut down the sanctuary permanently. She hadn't considered that elephants remember everything. Every slight, every kindness, every moment of pain or joy becomes part of their eternal story. And Kessie remembered the woman who'd thrown rocks at the fence during her evening walks, screaming about smelly animals and property values. Now, standing in Karen's private paradise, Kessie's ancient eyes took in the obscene excess. The crystal-clear pool, filled with 40,000 gallons of drinking water while villages died of thirst. The manicured lawns that consumed more resources in a month than most families used in a year. She lunged toward her phone, water streaming from her designer swimsuit. Her perfectly applied makeup running in dark rivulets down her cheeks. "Help!" she screamed, her voice cracking with panic. "There's an elephant in my pool area. Send security. Send animal control. Send everyone." But the phone was further than she'd thought, and terror had made her clumsy. Her foot caught on the pool's edge, and she went down hard, her knee striking the marble, coping with a sickening crack. Pain shot through her leg like lightning, but adrenaline kept her moving. She crawled toward the lounger, scraping against the stone, leaving trails of blood on the pristine surface. Kessie watched this display with the patience of a creature that had survived poachers, drought, and human stupidity. She'd seen this before, the sudden realization that money and status meant nothing when faced with raw consequence. Karen's fingers finally closed around her phone. She dialed 911 with shaking hands, her voice a hysterical whisper. "This is Karen Whitfield at 1247 Belmont Drive. There's a massive elephant in my backyard. It broke through my security wall. I need immediate assistance. Ma'am, we're aware of the situation at the wildlife preserve. Officers are en route to your location. Can you get to a secure location inside your home? It's blocking my path to the house." Karen shrieked, though this wasn't entirely true. Kessie stood near the destroyed wall, seemingly content to observe. "This is insane. I pay taxes. I demand protection." Karen hung up and immediately started filming with her phone's camera. Even in crisis, her influencer instincts kicked in. This would be content gold, the ultimate Karen moment. She could already see the headlines: "Millionaire woman terrorized by rogue elephant." The victim narrative would be perfect. "Look at this," she panted into the camera, her voice a mix of terror and practiced outrage. "This is what happens when the city refuses to properly regulate dangerous animals. This elephant has invaded my private property, destroyed my security wall, and is now threatening my life." She panned the camera toward Kessie, who remained motionless, watching. "I've been warning the city council for months about the wildlife preserve. This is exactly what I predicted would happen. Someone could be killed." What Karen didn't realize was that her phone was automatically uploading to her social media accounts in real time. Her followers, accustomed to her daily outrage, began commenting immediately. "Oh my God, Karen, are you okay? Sue them for everything they've got. This is why we need stronger animal control laws." But scattered among the supportive comments were, "Others, didn't you post last week about wanting the preserve shut down? Karma's an elephant. Karen, maybe if you weren't such a horrible person, this wouldn't happen." The negative comments multiplied as the video went viral. Within minutes, #ElephantKarma was trending. Internet sleuths began digging through Karen's social media history, uncovering years of documented cruelty toward service workers, small business owners, and anyone who couldn't fight back. Meanwhile, Kessie had begun to move, not toward Karen, but toward the pool. The elephant lowered her massive head and extended her trunk toward the water, drawing up gallons in a single breath before spraying it across her back. "What is it doing?" Karen whispered into her phone, genuinely confused. The idea that Kessie might simply be hot and thirsty was beyond her comprehension. Kessie continued her bath, using Karen's $40,000 infinity pool as a personal cooling station. Each trunkful of water she sprayed sent ripples across the surface, disturbing the perfect mirror that had reflected Karen's artificial paradise. "It's contaminating my pool," Karen screamed. "Do you know how much that water costs?" She struggled to her feet, her injured knee sending jolts of pain up her leg. The physical discomfort only fueled her rage. This was her property, her sanctuary, her proof of superiority. She'd be damned if she'd let some overgrown zoo animal turn it into a watering hole. "Get out!" she yelled, limping toward the pool's edge. "This is private property. You don't belong here." Kessie's massive head turned toward her, water dripping from her trunk. In those ancient eyes, Karen saw something that made her blood freeze. Recognition. This wasn't a random encounter. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The rocks she'd thrown at the preserve fence during her evening inspections. The complaints she'd filed about noise pollution whenever the elephants trumpeted. The contractor she'd hired to create structural concerns with the enclosure. "You," she whispered. Her trunk shot out like a gray whip, wrapping around Karen's waist with the casual strength of a creature that could uproot trees, ended abruptly, leaving her followers to wonder what had happened to their queen of complaints. Below her, the water reflected her terrified face. The same water she'd demanded be drained and refilled because it was 1 degree too warm. The same water that families in drought-stricken regions would have treasured like liquid gold. Kessie held her there, letting the weight of consequence settle in. Then, with the gentleness of a creature that understood the value of mercy, she lowered Karen toward the water, not dropped. Lowered. Karen hit the surface with a splash that sent waves cascading over the infinity edge. The water closed over her head, and for a moment, the world went silent. No followers, no cameras, no validation, just the muffled sound of her own panicked heartbeat. She surfaced, gasping and sputtering, her designer swimsuit twisted around. Her body, her perfect hair, hung in wet strings across her face, and her waterproof makeup had become an abstract painting of shame. Kessie watched from the pool's edge, her message delivered with the precision of a doctoral thesis. The woman who had spent years throwing stones at her sanctuary now floated in her own excess. Finally experiencing a consequence, she couldn't complain. Away, in the distance, sirens wailed. Help was coming, but not for Karen. They were coming for Kessie, to return her to the preserve where she belonged. The elephant's ears flapped once, a gesture of satisfaction, before she turned toward the hole she'd made in the wall. As she prepared to leave, Kessie did something that would haunt Karen for the rest of her life. She picked up a piece of broken marble from the destroyed statue and gently placed it on the pool's edge. A gift, a reminder, a promise that some things in this world could not be bought, bullied, or complained into submission. Karen floated in her contaminated pool, watching 6 tons of ancient wisdom disappear through the gap in her perfect wall, and realized that for the first time in her adult life, she had absolutely nothing to say. By the time the emergency responders arrived, Karen's empire was already crumbling. The viral video had been shared 2.3 million times, spawning a digital avalanche that buried her carefully constructed reputation under an ocean of overdue justice. Miguel Rodriguez was the first to see the footage. He'd been in the break room at his second job night, custodian at the medical center when his daughter Rosa showed him her phone. "Papa, isn't this the lady who screams at you?" Miguel watched in stunned silence as Karen was lifted by Kessie's trunk, her face contorted with the kind of genuine terror she'd spent years inflicting on others. For 20 seconds, he said nothing. Then, quietly, he began to laugh. It started as a chuckle, then grew into something deeper. 20 years of swallowed pride, 20 years of yes, ma'am, and I'm sorry, ma'am. 20 years of watching his dignity get flushed down Karen's perfectly maintained toilets. All of it came pouring out in waves of cathartic laughter that brought tears to his weathered eyes. Papa Rosa had never seen her father like this. "Mia," he said, wiping his eyes, "sometimes God sends an elephant." Across town, Romano's restaurant was experiencing its busiest night in months. The elephant video had triggered a reverse boycott as thousands of viewers, horrified by Karen's documented cruelty, flocked to support the businesses she'd tried to destroy. Orders were backing up, tables were packed, and Tony Romano stood behind, the register with tears streaming down his face. "She almost killed us," he told a reporter who'd arrived to cover the story. "My family's been making pasta for 4 generations. We survived the Depression, 2 wars, and the pandemic. But she almost finished us with lies. The reporter's camera captured the line of customers stretching around the block, many holding signs reading Team Elephant and Justice for Romanos inside. Families shared plates of the insufficiently al dente pasta that had triggered Karen's campaign of destruction. The elephant knew, said Mrs. Chen, an elderly customer who'd been coming to Romanos for 30 years. Animals can sense evil. That elephant was delivering justice. Meanwhile, at Belmont Estates, Karen sat in her emergency room bed, staring at her phone in numb shock. Her follower count was hemorrhaging. Brands were dropping sponsorship deals. Her Karen's Crusades website had been taken down. After being overwhelmed with traffic from people posting evidence of her victims' destroyed lives, Detective Maria Santos entered the room, her expression grim. She'd been investigating the preserve sabotage all day, and the evidence trail led directly to Karen's manicured doorstep. Mrs. Whitfield, I need to ask you about your relationship. With Premier Contracting Services, Karen's lawyer, a sharply dressed woman named Patricia Mills, immediately intervened. My client won't be answering questions without proper representation. That's fine, Santos said, placing a folder on the hospital bed table. But she might want to see this. Inside were bank records, surveillance photos, and recorded phone conversations. Karen's face went pale as she recognized her own voice. I don't care how you do it. I want those animals gone. Make it look like an accident. Criminal mischief, conspiracy to endanger wildlife, reckless endangerment, Santos recited, and that's just the beginning. The FBI is opening a federal investigation into your pattern of harassment and business interference. Turns out, systematically destroying small businesses crosses some interesting jurisdictional lines. Patricia Mills closed the folder quickly. This conversation is over. But Santos wasn't finished. Funny thing about elephants, Mrs. Whitfield, they remember everything, every kindness, every cruelty. Today, one of them reminded you that actions have consequences. As the detective left, Karen's phone buzzed with a notification that made her remaining color drain away. Her homeowner's insurance company was dropping her coverage, citing the security breach and her documented pattern of creating liability situations. Her real estate agent called next. Karen. Honey, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the HOA is calling an emergency meeting. There's talk of asking you to leave Belmont Estates. They can't do that, Karen whispered. Actually, they can. There's a morals clause in the community guidelines. After today's single quotes incident and all the publicity, some of the neighbors are concerned about property values. The irony was exquisite. Karen, who had spent years weaponizing property values against others, was now being destroyed by the same logic. Her phone rang again. This time, it was her ex-husband, Richard, calling from his new life in Colorado. I saw the video, he said without preamble. 20 years of marriage, Karen. 20 years of watching you destroy people for sport. I should have spoken up. Richard, our daughter, called me. She's so ashamed she's changing her last name back to mine. She said she can't handle being associated with you anymore. The line went dead. Karen stared at the phone, realizing that Jessica, her only child, had been absent from her contacts for weeks. She'd been so busy building her digital empire that she'd failed to notice her own daughter pulling away. She scrolled through her recent call history. Business associates, contractors, service providers. When was the last time she'd had a genuine conversation with another human being? When was the last time someone had called her just to say hello? The answer came like a physical blow. Never. Dr. Jennifer Walsh entered the room, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Whitfield, your knee injury is relatively minor, just some bruising and swelling, but I'm concerned about your mental state. Have you considered speaking with someone about? I'm fine, Karen snapped, some of her old venom returning. I don't need therapy. I need justice. That animal assaulted me on my own property. Dr. Walsh's expression hardened. That animal, Mrs. Whitfield, showed more restraint than most humans would have in her situation. You're lucky to be alive. She left, and Karen was alone again with her phone and her crumbling empire. The comments on her social media accounts had become a tsunami of schadenfreude. Screenshots of her cruelest moments were being shared millions of times, each one accompanied by gleeful declarations that karma had finally caught up with the queen of complaints. But the cruelest cut came from an unexpected source. Her victims were speaking out. The flower shop owner she'd destroyed over an expired coupon had started a crowdfunding campaign to reopen. It had raised $50,000 in 6 hours. The dry cleaner was being interviewed on local news, telling the story of how Karen's false health department complaints had nearly cost him his business and his family's livelihood. Most devastating was the coffee shop owner, a young single mother named Amy, who had attempted suicide after Karen's harassment campaign drove her to bankruptcy. Amy was alive, thanks to intervention from friends, but her story shared in a tearful video response had gone viral alongside the elephant footage. "She didn't just destroy my business," Amy said, her voice breaking. "She destroyed my faith in humanity. But today, watching that elephant stand up to her, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Hope that bullies don't always win. Hope that someone, somewhere, is keeping score." Karen's hands shook as she watched the video. Amy remembered the satisfaction she'd felt when the coffee shop closed, remembered the thrill of victory when her negative reviews had overwhelmed the young woman's livelihood. She had never once considered that Amy was a real person with real feelings, real bills, real children depending on her. Now, staring at Amy's tear-streaked face on her phone screen, Karen felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: shame. The emotion was so foreign that she almost didn't recognize it. Shame was for other people, for the weak, for those who accepted blame instead of shifting it. But here it was, sitting in her chest like a lead weight, growing heavier with each passing moment. Her reflection in the phone screen showed a woman she barely recognized. Her perfect makeup was gone, her designer hair was a mess, and her eyes, for the first time in years, looked genuinely human. Outside her hospital room window, the sun was setting over a city that had spent the day celebrating her downfall. Vigils were being held for her victims. Support funds were being established. The elephant video had become a symbol of resistance against entitled cruelty. And in the growing darkness, Karen Whitfield finally understood what she had become: the villain in everyone else's story. The realization should have made her angry. Instead, it made her feel something even worse: utterly, completely alone. 3 days after the elephant incident, Karen stood in the wreckage of her perfect life, surrounded by FBI agents who treated her marble palace like a crime scene. Special Agent Rebecca Torres held up a tablet showing security footage from the wildlife preserve footage that captured Karen's contractor cutting through the elephant enclosures, fencing under cover of darkness. "Mrs. Whitfield, this is your opportunity to cooperate," Torres said, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "We have recordings, financial records, and testimony from your contractor, who's already agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence." Karen's new lawyer, her third in 72 hours, after the previous 2 dropped her when the evidence became overwhelming, whispered urgently in her ear, "Karen, they have you dead to rights. The contractor recorded your conversations. This isn't going away." The weight of consequence was crushing. Federal charges carried real prison time. Her assets were frozen pending investigation. The IRS had opened an audit that would strip away years of questionable deductions. Most devastating of all, Jessica had filed for a restraining order, claiming her mother's pattern of harassment and public behavior made her fear for her safety. But the real torture was the silence. For 30 years, Karen's phone had been a constant source of validation. Calls, texts, notifications, a digital for drip of importance that proved she mattered. Now it sat silent on her kitchen counter, a black rectangle reflecting her isolation. The few calls that did come were from reporters, process servers, and lawyers representing her victims. Amy's attorney had filed a civil suit seeking damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress. Romano's was demanding compensation for lost revenue. Even Miguel had joined a class-action lawsuit representing service workers subjected to systematic harassment and intimidation. The doorbell rang and Karen's stomach clenched. More FBI agents. Another process server. She peered through the peephole and saw someone unexpected. Dr. Sarah Chen, the veterinarian from the wildlife preserve. Karen opened the door cautiously, half expecting to be served with another lawsuit. "Mrs. Whitfield," Dr. Chen said quietly, "may I come in?" "If you're here to gloat, I'm here to talk about Kessie." The elephant's name hit Karen like a physical blow. In all the legal chaos, she'd somehow managed to avoid thinking about the actual animal that had destroyed her world. It was easier to focus on lawyers and lawsuits than to confront the ancient intelligence she'd seen in those eyes. They sat in Karen's pristine living room, surrounded by the artifacts of her success. Dr. Chen looked around at the marble statues, the imported artwork, the crystal sculptures, and Karen saw her home through the veterinarian's eyes, a monument to excess built on the suffering of others. "Kessie is back at the preserve," Dr. Chen said. "She's been different since the incident, quieter, more thoughtful, if that makes sense. I don't understand why you're here, because I think you need to understand what you did. Not just the sabotage, but before that. The rocks you threw at our fence, the complaints you filed, the harassment you subjected our animals to for months." Karen's defensive mechanisms kicked in. "I was protecting my property values. Those animals are dangerous." "Kessie is 47 years old," Dr. Chen said, her voice steady but firm. "She was orphaned at 2 when poachers killed her mother for ivory. She spent 20 years in a traveling circus, beaten and chained, performing tricks for audiences who saw her as entertainment. When we rescued her, she was so traumatized she wouldn't let humans touch her for 3 years." The words landed like physical blows. Karen had never considered the elephant's history, never wondered about the intelligence behind those ancient. "AICH finally learned to trust again," Dr. Chen continued. "Our preserve became her sanctuary, the first safe space she'd known since childhood. And then you began your campaign to destroy it. I didn't know you didn't want to know. You saw an obstacle to your comfort and decided it had to be eliminated, just like you've eliminated every other inconvenience in your path." Dr. Chen pulled out her phone and showed Karen a video. Kessie stood in her enclosure, gently touching the fence with her trunk. The massive elephant seemed smaller somehow, diminished. "She keeps checking the barriers," Dr. Chen explained. "She's afraid someone will hurt her home again." "You didn't just sabotage our fence, Mrs. Whitfield. You broke her sense of safety." Karen stared at the screen, watching Kessie's careful, fearful inspection of her habitat. For the first time, she saw the elephant not as an inconvenience, but as a living being with feelings, memories, and trauma. "Why are you showing me this?" Karen whispered. "Because I think somewhere inside you is a person who might actually care. The woman who married Richard 25 years ago, the mother who held Jessica as a baby. That person existed once." Dr. Chen stood to leave, then paused. "There's something else you should know." After the incident, Kessie did something I've never seen in 20 years of working with elephants. She gathered flowers weeds, really, from the construction site where she broke through your wall. She arranged them in a pattern and stood guard over them for hours. "I don't understand. Elephants have funeral rituals. When one of their kind dies, they gather plants and stand vigil. Kessie was mourning something, Mrs. Whitfield. I think she was mourning the person you used to be." After Dr. Chen left, Karen sat alone in her silent house, surrounded by the evidence of her hollow success. She walked to her home office, where awards and certificates covered the wall's recognition from business organizations, civic groups, charity boards. All the proof she'd thought she needed that she was important, valuable, worthy of respect. But now she saw them differently. Every award was purchased with donations she'd made for tax benefits. Every certificate came from organizations she'd joined to build her network, not to serve their causes. Even her charity work had been transactional photo opportunities and tax deductions disguised as altruism. She opened her laptop and began scrolling through years of social media posts. Her Karen's Crusades blog contained hundreds of entries documenting her campaigns against small businesses, service workers, and anyone who dared to inconvenience her. Reading them now was like watching a horror movie where she was the monster. Day 423. The barista at Corner Coffee. Spelled my name wrong on my cup. Unacceptable. Time to teach them about customer service standards. Day 445. The dry cleaner claims they can't remove the stain from my Hermes scarf. Obviously, they don't understand the value of quality clothing. Making some calls. Day 467. The florist refused to honor my expired coupon. Their loss. By tomorrow, the whole city will know about their disrespectful customer service. Post after post, year after year, an endless catalog of petty vengeance dressed up as righteous indignation. And beneath each entry, hundreds of comments from followers cheering her on, validating her cruelty, encouraging her to escalate. She had built an empire on other people's misery, and her subjects had loved her for it. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Saw the elephant video. You destroyed my food truck 3 years ago. I lost everything and had to move back in with my parents. Today I opened a new restaurant. Thank you for showing me what not to become. Another message arrived. You tried to get me fired from my teaching job over a parent conference you didn't like. It didn't work, but you put me through hell. Watching that elephant put you in your place was the best thing I've seen all year. Then another. My daughter works at the coffee shop you targeted. She was 17 and trying to save for college. You made her cry every day for a month. She's stronger now, no thanks to you. They kept coming. Victim after victim, sharing their stories, reclaiming their voices. Not to threaten or abuse her, but to bear witness to the pain she'd caused, to make her see the human cost of her digital crusades. By midnight, Karen had received over 300 messages. Each one was a life she'd touched with cruelty, a dream she'd helped destroy, a person she'd treated as less than human. She closed her laptop and walked to the sliding glass doors that led to her pool area. The pool had been drained and was being refilled, but it would never be the same. Kessie's presence had changed something fundamental about the space. It was no longer her sanctuary, but a reminder of consequence. The broken wall had been repaired, but Karen could still see where it had been breached. 12 feet of reinforced concrete and decorative ironwork designed to keep the world out and her perfection in it. Might as well have been tissue paper when confronted with 6 tons of moral clarity. She thought about Dr. Chen's words. Kessie was mourning the person you used to be. Had there ever been a different version of herself? She tried to remember the woman who'd married Richard, the young mother who'd held Jessica, the person who'd once felt genuine empathy for others. But those memories felt like stories about someone else, faded photographs of a stranger. Somewhere along the way, that person had died, and in her place had risen something monstrous, a creature that fed on others' pain and called it justice. The question that haunted her now, as she stood in the ruins of her empire, was whether that person could ever be resurrected, or if Karen Whitfield was doomed to remain exactly what she'd become, a cautionary tale wrapped in designer clothes. Forever remembered as the woman who met